Welcome to Note and Compass, everybody. I'm Peter Nelson, and I'm here to tell you about this hand-fabricated star sapphire pendant that I just finished. Hand-fabricated, I made it completely from scratch, from melted down silver nugget, sterling silver, and I fabricated the bezel from sheet and wire, both sterling and fine silver, which I'll talk about a little bit later. Now, my process generally works like this. Stones are what inspire me, so I take the stones and play with them on a table. And as I move them around, ideas start to jump into my head, and I go, well, that's cool. And sometimes it is cool, sometimes it's ridiculous. But ping-ponging between the cool and the ridiculous is how you find something that's genuinely new. So I was looking through my scraps for a plate back because I know that I wanted to put this star sapphire in a bezel setting. That's a collar that holds it in. And this is one of the oldest styles of settings, and even though it's not technically complicated, as long as it's executed well, it is an incredibly elegant setting, and perfect for cabochons. That collar holds the stone in, protecting it from outside blows, while also giving it a very fluid type of design. So I knew that's what I wanted. And I like to have movement in my jewelry, especially when it comes to star sapphire. So if it's not going to be a ring where I'm moving my hands all of the time, then having it on a small chain is a great way to introduce that movement. Because the point of the star will move depending on where the light is. And frankly, I just find that more interesting. Now the question was what to do with the top part. So I took one of the silver nuggets that I had melted down years ago, and I just start turning it around, putting it next to the star sapphire that I knew I wanted to use, and I decided that this was going to be a bit of a shield shape. Why? Seemed like a good idea. So let me give you a moment to come behind the bench with me and see what it's like to work on jewelry. You'll be right over my shoulder. Hand-fabricated jewelry requires that each piece be made individually, and oftentimes each individual piece is made of separate components. So here I am soldering together the bezel wire. And once we see that that fits the sapphire properly, even if it looks a little bit lumpy, there's going to be a lot of adjustment. Then we have to solder it to the back plate. So that's 2 solder joints already. If we're not careful about controlling the heat, then at any time, one of those pieces could just melt down. Now the fine silver bezel wire is a lot lighter than the sterling silver back plate, so I have to direct the heat onto that back plate. That's why it's turning orange first. That heat will conduct up into the bezel wire and then it will solder together without melting the fine silver bezel. We put it into the pickle to eat off the borax flux. And after giving it a nice wash to get the acid off, then after washing the acid off, then we have to saw out that back plate so it fits right up to the bezel wire. Now they say that the saw is the smallest file that you own, so once we get that generally roughed out, then I have to go back in with the saw and continue to get it as close to that back plate as possible. Otherwise I'm going to spend ages with the file. I'm going to spend ages with the file anyway, but better to spend less time. It's all about being efficient. Once we're done with the file, then we go on to the sandpaper sticks. After the general cleanup of the bezel, then we have to bring down the sides of the bezel so that it matches the cabochon that's going to be set in it. That black line is where I want it to end up. If we leave it too high, it's just going to fold over when we get to setting process. Now that nugget, I have to do a lot of filing on, so I'm using this heavy-duty hand vise to hold it while I file it into this shield shape. Now we've got the 2 major components, the upper and the lower. And these 2 components are going to be connected by jump rings. So I made quite a few to make sure that if I melted one, it wasn't going to be an issue. Now here I have to use my deadly strength to hold these jump rings while I cut them out. Giving it a good test fit to make sure that we're not soldering things in places without actually having them work properly. I want it to be able to dangle, so thread one of those jump rings through and give it a test. So it fits and there's still some movement, which is great. So that shield portion is going to fit right on top, but I have to connect something for the jump ring to connect to. So we're going to solder on this half moon jump ring. Again, if you look at that color, you can notice that the upper area is where I'm focusing my heat, otherwise that small jump ring is going to melt. Successfully soldered on, as well as a top jump ring. Now the last thing that we've got is the lightest piece, which is that connecting jump ring in the middle. Now, if you look at that black area connected to the bezel, that's the sterling silver. It oxidizes a lot faster because of the copper content in the silver alloy. Everything else looks fairly white. So after we pull it out of the pickle, it's nice and bright. And this is basically what the finished pendant looks like, right? But we still have to set that ruby. This is the hard part. This is what takes a bit of practice. So if you look at how many fingers I've got engaged in this process doing different jobs, the amount of precision that you need to put that ruby where you want it to go is immense. And since I don't like boring round holes, I'm using my smallest saw to create an azure, this shield shape on the back side. We've got that ruby seated, the sapphire seated but not set, and now we can go clean up a little bit more on that azure, and then we can finally set the ruby and set the star sapphire. Here we've got the star setting engraved in, leaving the islands that we're going to turn into these beads, which I'll set now. Doesn't take a lot of force. And then we bead over those islands of metal, effectively creating prongs out of the body of the pendant. That's the same thing that pave is. So here we've got the ruby set, and shortly after we'll set the cabochon. Cleaning up the lip of the bezel with our graver so that it's nice and bright and even, and after a lot of polishing, which I won't show you because it's really boring. So this design is by no means incredibly complicated. A lot of the things that you will see in this pendant, many of you will be able to do after a couple of weeks in basic jewelry courses. But even though you start with the simple, we're always trying to push our skill. So this was a design where I decided that I wanted to try the star setting. That's what you see in the top part of this pendant. I set the ruby the same as I would with anything else with beads, but in order to do a star setting, you have to build in that engraved motif. Because we cut out those grooves to create the star, that's what channels light. So as that top plate of the pendant moves around, different parts of the star will be illuminated at different times. So not only is there motion in the pendant, but it also reacts with light in several different ways, not only from the star sapphire, but also the star setting. And that kind of weirdness is why I get out of bed in the morning. So further up and farther in, as they say, there's always more to learn, higher heights to grow towards. But if you are interested in this pendant or its other brother star sapphires, please head over to gemshepherd.com where you can get on the mailing list. These will be made exclusively available to the members of that list, so there's your chance. Otherwise, leave me a comment down below, hit subscribe if you haven't already, tell all your friends about me, and until next time, bye-bye.